The black waitress behind the counter didn't hesitate. She slid a hot cup of coffee to the man with the service dog, right in front of the health inspector. Her manager didn't shout, didn't scold. He just said it, cold, clipped, and final. "You're done here, Grace." 6 years. She'd worked every shift nobody wanted, learned every name that mattered. All erased with one sentence. Not because she'd made a mistake, but because she saw a soldier, not a violation. Grace didn't cry, just untied her apron with unsteady fingers and walked out. What she didn't know? Someone had caught it on camera. A quiet act of decency, shared with the world before the morning rush had even ended. By noon, the ground outside the cafe rumbled with power. 4 military Humvees pulled into the parking lot. Out stepped a Marine colonel in full dress blues, a man whose life had once been saved by the same vet Grace had refused to turn away. That was the moment everything changed. Grace Donnelly wasn't flashy. She didn't crave attention, didn't chase praise. But she ran the Mason mug like it was sacred ground. Nestled on the edge of Mason, Georgia, just 15 minutes from Fort Gringanger, the cafe had become a quiet refuge. The town itself looked like a slice of faded Americana. Oak trees over quiet sidewalks, flags on porches, a hardware store with the same peeling paint since the 80s. But inside the Mason mug, it felt different, more honest, more human. That was Grace. She didn't serve customers. She served people. Tired people. Grieving people. People who needed to sit somewhere that didn't ask them to explain what they'd seen. Her coffee wasn't fancy. No flavored syrups or barista tricks, just strong brews, hot refills, and hand-scrawled notes on a cluttered corkboard. But people didn't come for the coffee. They came for her. She remembered deployment dates, knew who liked their eggs burned and who stopped drinking after Iraq. She saw the pain before they said a word, and knew when silence was the only kindness. Every Wednesday at 9 a.m., she hosted Heroes Hour. It started small, just 3 regulars: Ben Donnelly, her late husband's father, and a retired Marine drill instructor; Ralph, a Vietnam vet with heavy eyes and a slow nod; and Louisa, a former Army nurse whose laugh rang through the cafe like it belonged in lighter times. Word spread. The circle grew. Veterans from different wars, different ranks, different scars, all drawn not by marketing but by something they couldn't name. A place to sit. A place to breathe. Grace opened each session with the same words. This is a place to be seen, not fixed. And that's what she gave them. Not therapy, not answers, just presence, just peace. Her own story? People knew without asking. Her husband, Staff Sergeant Michael Donnelly, had been killed in action 6 years ago. His photo still hung by the register, not in uniform, but in jeans and a flannel, sipping coffee on the front step. Taken 2 weeks before he left for Afghanistan. Taken 2 weeks before everything changed. Grace never remarried, never even tried. She'd poured everything into this cafe, her love, her grief, her purpose. And that Wednesday morning, the day the video started to change everything, began like all the others. The bell over the door jingled softly. The coffee brewed. And outside, justice was already on its way. By sundown, that quiet cafe would be all over national news. The spark? A Marine, a dog, and a black woman who refused to look away. The air had that sharp, cool brightness of late fall. Steam rose from coffee mugs like ghosts. Grace was already behind the counter, sleeves rolled, apron tied, setting out the ceramic mugs she saved for veterans. Her rhythm was second nature now. Then the door opened. Ray McMillan stepped in with Shadow by his side, a black lab German shepherd mix wearing a red vest marked, "Service Dog, Do Not Pet." Ray was new to the group. Late 50s, ex-Marine Corps recon, kept to himself. But he came. That meant something. "Window tables open," Grace said with a soft smile. He nodded. Shadow stayed close to his heel, never more than a breath away. As he took his seat, the cafe exhaled. Warm, easy, normal. And then the air shifted. The door flung open again, this time letting in a man with a clipboard and the warmth of a brick wall. Navy blazer, polished shoes, expression tight enough to snap. His name tag read, Logan Prescott. State Health Inspector Grace wasn't expecting a visit. Still, she smiled. "Can I help you find something?" "Inspection," he said, already moving. He moved through the cafe like a machine, eyes scanning every detail. He checked labels, pulled fridge doors, tapped countertops. Then he froze. His gaze locked on Shadow. "That animal is a violation," he barked. "No pets allowed where food is served." Conversations stalled, chairs creaked, all eyes shifted. Grace stepped from behind the counter, calm, centered. "He's a registered service dog," she said. "He's allowed under federal law." Prescott didn't blink. "I don't care what that vest says. Hair, dander, saliva. It's a contamination risk. Either the dog goes, or this place does." Ray sat still, hand gripping his coffee like it was all that tethered him. Shadow didn't move, just glanced up at him, waiting. Grace took a breath. "I'm not asking a Marine to leave," she said. "And I'm not asking his service dog to leave either." Prescott's lips tightened. "You're welcome to write your report," she added, voice low but unwavering. "But make sure you write that you tried to shame a veteran in front of the very people he protected." Someone across the room muttered, "Damn right." And then a second voice entered, louder, sharper. Grace Donnelly. The regional manager had arrived. Deborah Lyle, heels clicking, eyes like frost. She'd come for a routine check-in, and walked straight into a standoff. "You just violated a health compliance policy," she said. In front of a state official. "Pack your things. You're terminated." Gasps. A spoon dropped. Grace didn't move. Not yet. She turned. Looked at Ray. At Shadow. At the chalkboard on the wall. Hero's Hour today. Free coffee for vets. And then, a breath of a smile. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and set it on the counter. To the young barista beside her, she whispered, "Make sure Ray gets his refill." Then she walked out the side door, into sunlight. No one followed. But someone recorded. And somewhere out there, in the quiet scroll of social media and the fast hands of justice, a story had just started to burn. Some customers left their coffee untouched. Others sat stiff in their seats, eyes flicking toward the windows like they expected the wind to deliver an explanation. But Lena, the young barista Grace had trained, stayed behind the counter. Her hands trembled as she poured Ray's second cup. "I didn't know what to say," she would later admit. "But if I left that station, I'd be letting her down." Ray hadn't moved since Grace walked out. His coffee had gone cold. Shadow lay at his feet, alert but motionless, ears twitching at sounds only dogs seemed to hear. It felt like something sacred had been broken. And then came the sound. A low, distant rumble. Faint at first, like thunder rolling through the Georgia hills. Coffee rippled in cups. The floor gave a faint shake. Windows hummed. Chairs scraped. People stood. From the east end of Main Street, emerging through the morning mist, came 4 military Humvees in single file. Tires grumbled against the pavement, headlights carved through the fog. They rolled into the cafe's parking lot like they owned time. All 4 vehicles halted at once. Their doors swung open in perfect sync. Out stepped Colonel Richard Gaines, Marine Corps dress blues, polished boots, white gloves in hand. His chest bore a full wall of ribbons, his presence firm and unreadable. Behind him, 24 Marines in formation filed in, uniforms crisp, posture rigid. They stood outside the cafe at attention. Inside, not a soul moved. Inspector Logan Prescott had backed up near the pastry case, clipboard lowered, face pale. Deborah Lyle, the regional manager, stepped aside like the tile floor might turn to fire. The bell jingled. Colonel Gaines entered alone. His boots struck hard wood like a drumbeat in a silent chapel. He moved slowly, eyes sweeping the room. He glanced at Lena, who swallowed and nodded, then locked eyes with Ray. Ray stood, quiet, steady. They exchanged a look, veteran to veteran, and then the colonel raised his hand in a crisp salute. I didn't know," Prescott stammered. The colonel's voice was low but clear. You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. He turned to Lena. Is Grace Donnelly here? She shook her head. She was fired, she said, for standing up for Mr. McMillan and his dog. Colonel Gaines's jaw clenched. That woman gave more to the men on this base than most agencies ever did. She made a space for them when no one else could. When they came home and had no words left, she let them breathe. Ray cleared his throat. His voice cracked but didn't shake. She didn't flinch, he said. Didn't ask questions. Just poured the coffee and gave me a seat. First time in years I felt human again. Near the register, a woman quietly wiped away a tear. The colonel nodded once. Then he turned toward the Marines outside and gave a signal. They entered the café in silent formation. Two walked behind the counter and carefully removed the corporate logo from the wall, folding it like a flag. Another replaced the chalkboard sign with a new one. Hand-painted bold white letters. Welcome to Grace's house, where honor is served daily. Deborah Lyle stepped forward. You can't just... Colonel Gaines looked at her once. You made your decision, he said. Now we've made ours. He stepped outside and made a call. Inside, Lena's phone buzzed. She stared at the screen. It's from Fort Gringanger, she whispered. They're requesting Grace report to base headquarters. Today. Ray let out a long breath. Shadow stood, tail still. Something new was brewing in that cafe. Not just coffee. Justice. The message was simple. Colonel Gaines requests your presence at Fort Gringanger headquarters today. Grace stared at it on her phone, unsure what it meant. Was it gratitude? A warning? An obligation? Still, something in her gut shifted. This wasn't about coffee anymore. Something larger had begun. She turned the key in her ignition and pulled onto the familiar two-lane road. She'd driven it countless times with muffin trays and bulk grounds in the back seat. But this time, she wasn't making a delivery. She was reporting in. Fort Gringanger rose like a quiet military city. Precise roads, flags lining the streets, cadence echoing from the distance. She'd been here before as a military wife. This time felt different. Outside the main administration building, Colonel Gaines stood waiting. No dress blues now. Just khakis and calm authority. Grace, he said, shaking her hand. Thank you for coming. She nodded. I'm still not sure why I'm here. Let me show you something. He led her down a hallway lined with training maps and black and white portraits of former commanders. They stopped at a door marked Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative. Inside, the space was bare bones. Folding chairs, blank whiteboards, unopened boxes of therapy mats and donated supplies. A few young staffers moved quietly, arranging equipment. This is a pilot program, the colonel said. 2 years in the works. We've had everything, except someone who gets what these people carry, on the inside. Grace crossed her arms. I'm not a therapist. No degree, no license. He smiled. You ran a cafe that did more healing than most government programs. You remembered names, gave silence when needed, made space for pain without demanding explanation. That was leadership. She said nothing, but her shoulders lowered slightly. From a back room, a quiet voice called out, Is that her? A young woman appeared, maybe mid-20s. Burn scars covered her jaw and arms. A golden retriever pup walked beside her in a red vest marked, In Training. Hi, the woman said shyly. I saw the video, you and the dog. I haven't been in a cafe since I came back. But I think I could sit in a place you run. Grace blinked. Something shifted in her chest. The colonel stepped forward. We want you here. Not as a face on a brochure, as the director. You'd shape the space, lead the team, design the programs. Grace let out a quiet breath. You're serious? As a heart attack, he said. You already know what works. Community, trust, routine. You built it without a manual. Grace looked at the young woman, now kneeling beside her pup. She thought of Ray, of Shadow, of the dozens who came to the cafe not for coffee, but peace. And she nodded. Okay, I'll do it. The colonel smiled. Then let's get to work. That evening, Grace stood alone in the quiet space that would become the heart of Fort Gringanger's outreach. The walls were blank. The air still smelled of cardboard and floor wax. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo. Her husband, Michael, sitting on the steps of the Mason mug, boots kicked up, smiling. She pinned it to the wall. No plaque. Just memory. By week's end, word had spread. Veterans who hadn't set foot on base in years returned. Young soldiers arrived with uncertain partners. The local paper ran a front-page story. From Café to command, Grace Donnelly rebuilds trust one cup at a time. She didn't use buzzwords or consultants. She just listened and remembered. And finally, the healing had a home. Taped to the coffee pot was a handwritten note. Who needs a ride? Who needs a listener? Grace didn't just run a wellness center. She wove care into its corners. Dogs were welcome. Silence was respected. And that same old notebook from her café days? Still in her hands, now filled with new names, new dates, new stories. Some days were quiet. Some carried grief so heavy it bent the air. But something was forming. More than a program. A place where veterans could just exist. Unjudged. Unfixed. Understood. Ray showed up often now. Shadow would go straight to his favorite corner, curl up like he was home. Tiffany came on Tuesdays, still too shy for group sessions, but drawing again. Soft sketches of dogs, boots, and welcome signs. Her golden retriever pup never left her side. And Lena? Every Friday. Coffee in hand, laughter in her voice. When Grace needed help picking a paint color or rewriting a mission statement, Lena answered like she always had, without hesitation. But not everyone saw the magic. A few officials questioned her role. No credentials, no degree, just heart. That wasn't enough for everyone. Auditors arrived in suits, quiet and sharp. They checked sign-in logs, measured office space, tested water filters on the coffee machine like they were looking for scandal in the steam. At the end, one turned to her and asked, "What certifications do you have to counsel veterans?" Grace met his gaze. "None," she said softly. "Just consistency and care." He didn't respond, but he took notes. A week later, she received a formal letter. The wellness center was being reviewed for possible national expansion. Colonel Gaines called it a milestone. Grace called it surreal. Still, she missed the Mason mug. One afternoon, she stopped by unannounced, just to breathe it in. Lena saw her first. "You're supposed to be a big deal now," she said, sliding a mug across the counter. "I'm just here for the coffee," Grace replied. The cafe had changed, but it felt the same. Photos of veterans now lined the walls. A small wooden sign near the register read, "Grace's Corner, where no one sits alone." That evening, Grace spoke at a community fundraiser. A small crowd. Kids with crayon signs, folding chairs. She didn't bring a speech. "I didn't mean to start anything," she told them. "I just wouldn't throw out a man and his dog." Silence. Then applause. Loud, honest, from the gut. In the back, Ray stood. His silver star pinned to his chest. He raised one hand in a quiet, deliberate salute. Later that night, back at the center, Grace added a photo to the wall. It showed the Mason mug the morning after the Humvees arrived. People shoulder to shoulder, coffee cups in hand, dogs under tables, no panic, no shame, just presence. Above it, she taped a card that read, "Legacy isn't what we build, it's what we protect in others." In that stillness, she realized the cafe hadn't closed. It had transformed. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived, sealed in gold, hand-delivered by Colonel Gaines. "You'll want to sit down for this," he said with a grin. She opened it slowly. "You are hereby nominated for the National Civilian Commendation for Distinguished Service to Veterans." Grace blinked. "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. "That's why it matters," he replied. Grace stared at the letter in her hands. "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. Colonel Gaines gave a small smile. "That's exactly why it matters." She sat for a long moment, the weight of it settling in her chest. The nomination. The invitation. A speech at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference in D.C. 3 weeks later, she stepped off the plane with nothing but a small suitcase, Michael's old watch, and the same notebook she'd used behind the café counter, still full of names and quiet truths. The morning of the ceremony, she was adjusting her collar when she heard a voice behind her. "You ready?" She turned. Ray McMillan stood in full dress blues, Shadow at his side, calm and steady. "The base assigned me as your escort," he said with a grin. Grace laughed, half nerves, half awe. "You clean up pretty good," Ray smirked. "You're the one about to speak to the Pentagon." The ballroom was vast. White linen tables, polished brass fixtures, and cameras angled from every corner. Her name glowed softly on the screen behind the podium. When she stepped up, her voice was soft, but the room leaned in. "I'm not a general. I didn't write a bill or lead troops," she began. "I ran a cafe near a base. I poured coffee. I remembered names. A beat. And somehow, in that space, healing happened. Vets came not to be fixed, but to be seen." Silence. Then nods. Then tears. "One day I lost my job for letting a Marine sit with his service dog. That moment changed everything. But it was never about coffee. It was always about dignity." Applause exploded. Ray didn't clap. He just nodded, like a man who'd heard truth spoken plainly. That night, needing air, Grace stepped outside. The sky stretched wide and quiet. A man in a gray suit approached, gentle eyes behind thin glasses. "You don't remember me," he said. Grace studied him. He pulled out an old photo. Michael, young and smiling, seated with a uniformed man outside the cafe. "That's me," he said. "You poured me a cup of coffee the day I got my discharge. You didn't say anything. Just smiled. That was the first time I felt like myself again." He handed her the photo. "It's yours now." Back in Mason, they held a celebration. But Grace returned first to the wellness center. It was late. Still. She walked to the photo wall and pinned 2 pictures side by side. One of the conference crowd rising to their feet, and the old cafe photo with Michael. Below them, she wrote, "Honor grows where kindness is consistent." As she turned, a young veteran paused at the doorway. "Is this for people like us?" She smiled. "No, son. It's for people like all of us."